Miranda Rijks, thank you for spending some time with us on this Friday. You have written 22 psychological thrillers since we met in 2017. How many books have you sold at this point?
600,000.
Wow. Wow, 600,000. That puts you in the top 10%, if not higher, of authors of all time as far as book sales go. And so, of course, I wanted to have a conversation about three major things. I wanted to talk about your journey, how you went. I mean, we met in 2017. You had published a few nonfiction books, and then you started writing novels, and it took off. You've had such a wonderful career. So I'd love to talk a little bit about your journey overall in order to give us all hope. And then your speed in writing books is incredible. Let's talk a little bit about the writing process and then finish off with, I know a lot of people listening are interested in selling more books and understanding how you do it. 600,000, that's incredible. So I'm really excited to dive in. And first off, you have a new book, The Godchild, came out 3 days ago. Would you tell us a little bit about the new book?
Yeah, sure. So it's another standalone psychological thriller, and it's about Karina, who is a head teacher of a school, and she has three children. And her long lost godchild turns up at her door, and she lets her in. And then there are all sorts of strange things happen thereafter.
Because the mother disappeared. Yeah.
So her mother, so she'd lost contact with her mother, with
Oh.
her friend, the mother who, and yeah, and the mother's disappeared. And so Alicia, the godchild, she looks up her godmother, who she hadn't met since she was about 10 years old, and turns up at her doorstep.
Amazing. And one of the things I am so excited about is the books are on Audible now. And so I imbibe books at the end of the day in on Audible. I just read Make Her Pay, and just a fun preview. These are my words, but I think one of the things that have made your books, yay, Make Her Pay,
Yay!
one of my favorites of all time. So Make Her Pay is about uh, Leonie, who was in a car accident 10 years before the book takes place. So she's successful. She's about to get married to her dream man. And then a person who died in the car accident is all of a sudden causing all of these strange things to happen in her life. And we don't know what's going to happen. And there are a lot of twists and turns. And I loved the very ending. You have to listen to the very end because it flipped everything on its head. And it even had some humor in it too, which it's one of those books that you put down and you just sigh because of the satisfaction of reading it. So yes, thank you for expanding out to Audible. I'm sure everybody is going to appreciate that too. So now to get into the good stuff. We met 17 years ago. You were actually
Not 17 years. Not 17 years ago.
exactly. It will be someday, and I'm sure we'll
Feels like
be
it.
YouTube's. Exactly. I'll be like, remember? And yes, it will grow from here. We met in 2017, and you were my very first client at that time. We worked on about 5 books together. And so I love your journey, and I'd love for you to share it from your perspective. So becoming an author of novels, what did that take, and how, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay, sure. So my journey started before we met, and I'd actually had two books published. One was a nonfiction, the other was a biography, and they were traditionally published. And then, as you know, I had a pretty horrific time in my life in 2015-16. I had bone cancer. And when I recovered from that, I had this overwhelming urge to write a women's fiction book about recovering from cancer. And I was on, I don't remember which Facebook forum it was, but you were looking for people to trial your book coaching program on. and I put my name forward, and that's how we met. So you helped me with that first book, which is called Don't Call Me Brave, and it is a women's fiction book. And because I'd been traditionally published, I actually did not want to be published. I wanted to self-publish. It was a conscious decision. So having really enjoyed the process of writing that book, I then thought, right, well, I want to carry on writing, but I'm going to write what I enjoy reading, and that's psychological thrillers. So you helped me write my first one, which was originally called The Obituary, but then was later called I Want You Gone. And I self-published that at the end of November 2018. And at the beginning of January 2019, I got approached by my current publishers, Inkubator Books. And let's just put this into context. It is unheard of to get approached by a publisher. It just does not happen. I got very lucky that they were new. They were starting out. I think I was the third author that they signed. And I was super cynical. I think we spoke on the phone, goodness, for a good 4 hours. But because I'd done my research into self-publishing, I knew the questions that I needed to ask them. And they had an answer to everything, and a good answer to everything. And I remember you and we talked about it, because at this point I had written, I think, 3 psychological thrillers, but I'd only published the one of them. And I just thought, well, I hadn't really got much to lose at this point. If it doesn't work out with them, fine, I'll just then self-publish thereafter. Anyway, I'm now writing book number 23 with Inkubator Books. So I think we can safely say it's worked.
It's worked. 600,000 books later, it's worked. There are,
in fact, Emily, I'm coming up for the 5th anniversary of my first book published. So they published I Want You Gone in April 2019. And we are now coming up to the 5th anniversary of that first book that they published.
Wonderful. And there are so many things I want to highlight from the narrative you just gave us, beginning with the difficult time that this came out of. So I know some people listening have big dreams and they're in rock bottom difficult times. And it's interesting that the women's fiction book that we worked on, this was our very first encounter, it really talks about the transformation. And I love the title of that book, Don't Call Me Brave, because when you're in a hard time, sometimes people will come at you with these one-liners like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and those things, and they can just sound a little light, a little insincere when you're really going through it. And at the same time, when we go through those rock bottom moments, we have that reevaluation that can lead to major transformation. And so not from oh, you people are so brave light point, but really, I mean, it's so inspiring and such an admirable move you made to really go for it. And then it worked, which brings me to the second thing I want to highlight is, so you had been published by a traditional publisher, and this helps people really get concrete about their dreams, because you started getting into conversation with this startup. At that time, we'd known one another for, just maybe 2 years. And I remember these conversations because you had people look at the contract. You understood the contract, which are a few things to highlight, because sometimes people don't read their contracts. And so you took a business risk. But would you consider this Inkubator Books that has been just such a wonderful partner to you, would you consider them traditional publishing, or could you give me the nuances of that?
Yeah, sure. So no, they're not traditional. They're digital first. So I'd call them an indie publisher. So the traditional publishers are the likes of Macmillan and Penguin and Random House and Bloomsbury. Actually, I was published by them for my first book. And typically you can't pitch a book to them. You have to go through an agent. So you would need to have your agent first, and then the agent would then pitch your novel to the publishers. And in my experience, they like to publish 1 book a year for an author. So they simply don't have the mechanisms in place to be flexible enough. This is just my opinion, please, to publish more than that. Also, financially, it's quite difficult because you typically would pay your agent 20% of your income. You would be offered an advance by the publisher, and that could be quite small because they don't tend to pay big advances to newbies. Then you have to, then your book is published, and I can talk through the process of that, which is very different to how I go through it. But once your book is published, once you start earning royalties, you have to have paid back your advance before you actually get any royalties. And bearing in mind, typically royalties are 10% of the sales price. So in my experience, there are very few people that can actually earn a living by being traditionally published. Yes, of course, you get your 0.1% of the very big names, but I personally don't know anybody who sits in that category. So then we have the digital first publishers, and they are very Amazon centric. So they pretty much, well, a large proportion of them will put their authors' books into Kindle Unlimited. And they don't, so you don't need an agent. I mean, some of them you do need an agent, but for incubators, they don't require an agent. So you can send your proposal directly to them. And then there is a royalty split, and that's what you get. You get your royalty split. And now I'm, as you can tell from my accent, I'm based in the UK. So I'm a member of the Society of Authors. In the US, the equivalent is the Authors Guild. And I'm assuming the Authors Guild does the same as the Society of Authors, but they offer a free service of contract checking. Obviously, I was fortunate that I already understood, well, I studied law a long time ago, but I understood the contracts because I'd had 2 contracts from traditional publishers first. So I was fairly confident in that, but you must always get your contract checked. It's just really stupid not to, in my opinion. And that's sort of is really the difference. And then you have the what's called the vanity publishers, and they expect the author to pay them to publish their book. I don't pay a single penny to Inkubator Books. They pay me. So they do everything. They do all the editing. They do the cover design. They do the marketing. And so I'm literally just writing the books. Although I do engage with bookstagrammers on Instagram and on Facebook, but that's just my choice. I don't have to do that.
That's wonderful. And I think the only way to navigate, the different kinds of publishing is just to hear from a variety of voices with experience. And so I so appreciate that. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is the fact that you're able to publish 4 books a year at this point with Inkubator Books. And so that's something we'd all love to know about. I know you did not start out at that pace, but that has really helped your career to be able to churn out books. What are the main points that have helped you to do that? Where should people focus?
Okay, so actually I did have that many books right at the beginning because I'd already written 3 books before I signed with them. We were able to sort of go at quite a pace. And then the other thing that I was fortunate about was that I kind of came onto the scene during, and I hate to say this, being fortunate, but in the COVID years. And so during the times of COVID, the smaller publishers were able to move really quickly. The bigger publishers, they shut up shop. So if you were due to be published by one of the traditional publishers during 2020, that would have been postponed potentially by a year. So that was beneficial. I have to admit that was beneficial to me. And so we had some bestsellers very early on. So The Visitors and The Arrangement were 2 of my sort of outstanding bestsellers at that point. And when I say a bestseller, I mean it's got to #1 in its category. It's got into, sort of the top 100 on Amazon.com or higher than that. So it's had those little badges from Amazon, and I've fortunately had quite a few of those over the last few years.
Yes.
So the process, I think it's the process of writing. I love Inkubator's process, which is quite unique. So their background is from screenwriting. When you write for screen, it's collaborative. There are a bunch of people in a room and they write together. Traditionally, that is not the case when you're writing fiction. And normally what would happen is you would write your book, you would pitch it to your agent, the agent would pitch it to the publisher, and the editor, they will accept you, and then the editor will go through it all and kind of tear it to pieces, and you've got to rewrite it, which isn't really a very, it's not really a very practical way of doing things. So we do it differently. What we do is we plot out the book in great detail, and I'm talking in so much detail that my synopsis can be 8,000 to 10,000 words long before I even start writing. So typically I pitch an idea to the bosses at Inkubator. If they like it, we'll then have a Zoom call. Normally there'll be 3 of us on the Zoom. It will be my editor and the boss of Inkubator. And we will just play around with it, play around with some of the ideas, talk about the characterization, talk about the key turns. So we always look at our books in 3 acts. And so we will try and work out what those act turns are likely to be. And then I will go away. I will write maybe a 2 or 3 page document, or sometimes a bit more than that. And then I'll have lots of Zoom meetings thereafter with my editor, and we will flesh out the book together. Then when that's finished, it then goes back to Inkubator, and then it's signed off by another editor. So at that point, there are at least 3 eyes that have even, have kind of seen the synopsis. We call it a beat sheet. Before I even start writing, only at that point do I start writing. Now, that process of plotting can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, or even more sometimes. Some just are really painfully slow, others go super quickly. And then when that's signed off, I start writing. So I type as fast as I think. So that is really helpful. So it does mean that I can, write quickly. And some books can go super fast and some not so. The one that I'm writing at the moment, I'm going a little bit more slowly. The Godchild, I had one day I wrote 7,000 words, which for me was the most I've ever written in one day. But typically I will do 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. I love writing, so it's not a chore, it's something that I enjoy doing. And I find that writing process very easy because I know exactly what I'm going to be writing, and I don't get lost in the complicated plots that are typical for psychological thrillers.
There is so much gold behind the scenes in that. And of course, I didn't realize you were going to highlight this, but the collaborative nature of the process. That's what I love about my job as a writing coach as well, because yes, sitting alone and writing is hard. And then taking a risk and looking for an editor with a finished product is a risk, because you don't know what they're going to say. You don't know if you'll be able to, you don't know what level of input you'll get. And so I know that it's such a fun way to work. And it's so interesting that they were screenwriters ahead of time. I love 3-act structure because it breaks it down. And some of the final things you were talking about is some books go faster than others. One of the things that has just been such a sticking point for me recently is work from momentum, not pressure. And I think when you look at someone who is very successful with their books, churning out books quickly, that makes you think you need to put pressure on yourself. But you have so much momentum behind you, and you keep working from that momentum. And in that way, it probably does get more and more delightful and a little easier too. Would you agree?
Yes, totally. I mean, going back to sort of working collaboratively, I mean, I was very spoiled because I had you for those first few books. And actually, I'm not really sure that I could do it by myself. And to be completely honest, if my publishers didn't have that process, I would still be working with you today. The only reason I'm not, although we do have projects on the side, don't we? But I'm talking my psychological thrillers. I would definitely still be working with you today because I would get lost. I mean, I have plenty of psychological thriller author friends, and they do it by themselves, and hats off to them, because honestly, I could not. So I find it incredibly valuable to have my editor, that we work on the plot together. And then even now, I get to a point in the book, probably about midway, and I have this massive dip of confidence. And so I write to my editor, and she says, or I hop on a Zoom with her, and she tells me, "You do this every book. Get about it. Just get on with it." A bit of tough love.
That's
It's really
wonderful.
important. Yeah, it's really important.
Well, thank
I don't
you.
need the accountability because I'm so in the flow of writing now. But that was the other thing, when you're starting out, is actually it's the confidence and the accountability, I think, are really important.
And then once you get that momentum going, then anything can happen. And you are so honest about some opportunities that have come your way that have been really big avalanches of traffic, which are spectacular. And at the same time, you were ready for those opportunities and your eyes were open to them. And so it kind of made synchronicity happen. And that actually leads us to the last point, this the collaboration and the fact that your collaborators have a lot of experience in screenwriting. I'd love to hear some of the things that help this formula and the way that you write books, what helps your books to sell so well.
Okay, so I think the number one thing is really, really understanding your genre. So if you think back to my second, third, and fourth books, I wrote a series of books called they were called the Fatal Series, but it was about a woman called Dr. Pippa Durant, who was a psychologist to the police. Now, those books, they've had very high ratings on Amazon, but they didn't really sell that well, certainly not in comparison to my other books. And I remember right at the beginning, the incubator, my publishers, they said to me, this it's not really on genre. We're not really sure where it sits. It's not completely a psychological thriller. It's not really a detective novel. It's kind of just sitting in the middle somewhere. And we're not confident about it. We'll publish them, but we're not confident that they're going to do really well. And they were completely right. So it's not kind of very romantic, but my belief is that if you want to sell well, you have to be absolutely on genre. And that means your cover has got to look like other covers in the genre. So I'm my psychological thrillers, these are just, oh, you can't see that. They are very much on trend, if you like, which is quite disappointing sometimes for the author because you want to have a cover that's going to look different to everybody else's. But the reality is you've got a split second for your reader to decide whether they're going to read your book or pass and move on to someone else's. So if someone goes onto Amazon or any other bookshop and they want to read a psychological thriller, they are going to choose something that sits within that expected norm. So that means that the blurb has got to be psychological thriller-ish, as has the cover, and of course the content. So now they expect a big twist at the end, and if you don't give them that, then the reader's going to be disappointed. And it doesn't matter whether you're writing psychological thrillers, if you're writing romance, if you're writing sci-fi, the genre, meeting those tropes is absolutely essential. And I can't stress that enough because that's what the readers expect. Do
And
you agree?
I absolutely agree and love it. And I think it's so important to know those keys to being able to make a book take off. And you have the example of when you went really deep into genre with screenwriters, you have the receipts to show it. And there are two things that make magic out of what you just said. You love reading psychological thrillers, so you love that genre. It's not as if you're sitting down and trying to follow something that isn't inspiring, that isn't incredibly creative. And that's the second thing, is it was so nice to read one of your newest books and the rich characters in that book, the surprises that I didn't see coming, where you set us up for one thing and then a completely different thing happens. That's fun. That's creative. And so often a clear structure can enhance creativity. So don't write it off. That's wonderful. This has been gold. Thank you so much. Your two most recent books, I'm going to put links below, and I'm going to put some of the that we worked on together too, which are your earliest books, but the growth and everything that has happened since then is incredible. Thank you for being so inspiring. Tell me.
Can I just say one little thing? I just want
Yeah.
to add one little thing. If you want to be a writer, you need to be a reader.
Yes. Yeah.
I read a huge amount in my genre, and I think people sometimes get worried that they're going to copy or they're going to plagiarize something else. Your voice is unique to you, and that just doesn't matter. Don't worry about that, but just read a lot, the type of books that you want to write.
That's the perfect message. Fascination makes the process go so much faster. Yeah, absolutely. Well, wonderful. I know people are going to get so much out of this, and all the links will be below. Talk soon. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.